Simon, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat.
This is a treat. I get to learn about herbalism from an expert who's been, in this field for decades. I'll be honest, I'm very new to the field. I had a conversation with Alex Laird a number of years ago, who's, I'm gathering you know her.
Very well.
Yeah. She was wonderful. It was great. We were in my studio. This is pre-pandemic. We cooked a lovely meal together. We're using lots of different herbs, and we just had a conversation. It was great. So that was my introduction. And now I guess this is moving on a bit, I think, in terms of like your experience. So tell me a bit about how you got into this field.
I started out as a medical scientist, did the degree at Cambridge, I never thought I was going to be a doctor. I thought I might do some research or some other. And then I traveled, as one did in those days. You didn't have to go straight into a job. We were baby boomers. So I traveled around the world, and I'd grown up on a fruit farm in New Zealand. So I sort of had a bit of horticulture in my background, a bit of plants. And I was traveling around in North Africa and Central America and staying in places where I could see people treating themselves with traditional remedies, and they're all plants. And that sparked a few thoughts in my mind. And I came back and then ran a small holding in Cornwall and bumped into a goat, my goat, called Emily. She was the she-goat. She ran the whole brood. But every day I would take her out on a long rope, bang the stake in the ground, and she would have 50 yards of Cornish hedge to roam around. And I began to notice that she wasn't hoovering up the herbage. She was actually picking very selectively the plants. And she seemed to be really making intelligent decisions. And no one had taught her anything. She couldn't read a book. And I began to watch, and there was already, this is a herb nursery we were running there. Yeah. So someone had told me about growing herbs, and I thought this was probably more fun than lettuces. So there we had the herbs in the pots, watching Emily choosing the plants very carefully. And it was only later, of course, I realized that she was choosing from a materia medica, because all the plants she was using were medicinal.
Wow.
And then I realized that she was fine-tuning her inner being, her inner metabolism, through her nose, and instinctively organizing her affairs just by her innate intelligence. And I made a decision then, Emily, I would like to be like you when I grow up.
That's incredible.
She's been my teacher.
That's incredible.
And then I discovered that there's a herbal medicine program it used to be Leicester in those days. So I went and studied, and because I'd done medical sciences, I sort of shot through quite fast. And then they saw me coming and began to put me in charge of things. And so I was around, as herbal medicine emerged out of the post-war gloom, and then complementary medicine came along. And I happened to be in a room in late 1970s with a guy called Stephen Fulder and a couple of other people looking at a report he'd written on alternative medicine. And he said, we've got to have a different word than alternative. Kind of supplementary to medicine, because that's, doctor deferral stuff. Why don't we call it complementary medicine? And that was the birth of what we now call CAM. So I was at the beginning of that. I was the first chair of the Council of Complementary Alternative Medicine in the early 80s. And then we set up a university program in Exeter in the mid-1980s on the back of some conversations that we had at the Royal Society of Medicine. And it persuaded the university authorities that this was worth studying. And then we set up this research and education program there. And then one thing led to another. But throughout, I've been a practitioner. I'm 45 years now seeing patients.
Wow. That's incredible.
Being just last man standing is probably the way you would describe me. Been around too long.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about the education piece. What do you exactly learn when you go and do the course on herbalism, and how close are you to being like Emily?
No, that's a difficult question, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't. Emily never read a book, so let's come to Emily later. So the current herbal medicine programs, and there's many of them, and they've changed a lot. I mean, the one I went on had been developed in the 1920s, and the staples had rusted through the paper. It was really quite embarrassing. So one of our jobs, and I was working with a colleague, Heinz Zelstra, and we set up the School of Herbal Medicine that in the late 1970s, and that sort of developed a more science-based, medical, recognizable, with a lot of botany and other sciences in as well. Great fun. And that was a template for future herbal medicine programs. There was Middlesex and various other universities picked up that, London, Westminster. And so for a while, and herbal medicine has now been almost like another health sciences program. Where you learn your Emily skills is, I don't think, on the program. And that's when you get your feel for it. And your gut starts coming in on the scene. And most herbal students are too full of data, and it probably takes a few years to settle into the Emily mode. But as you get older, and this is running forward, increasingly I practice like Emily. And so when I see a patient and I spend an hour or so with them and get the plan organized, and I'm a physiologist primarily, so I'm interested in how systems link up. So they come in with arthritis, but they walk out with something that's completely new and different. Everyone gets something different. And I put together something, and I've been around too long. I don't want to wait 3 months for something to happen. So I'll ask them to taste it first, and these are strong. So the first thing is to watch their face. Bloody hell, I never knew this is herbs. So you wax them, Emily, you see. And then I say, ring me tomorrow and let me know how things are going, because things can work really fast. It sets off things down here. I use the term acupharmacology, so operating on receptors and signals in the gut, and the gut is wired up in all sorts of wonderful ways, as you know, with the rest of the body, and so we can see changes literally overnight.
Yeah. Within medicine, we have the same problem, I think, the ability to separate out the placebo effects and the pharmacological effects. And I'm very open-minded. I'm of the opinion, if something works and the patient's having a great outcome from it, that's the way forward. How do we deal with this conundrum of giving someone a substrate, whether it be inert or something that clearly has a lot of powerful value, whether it's a botanical, whether it's a herb, whether it's a supplement, from the very powerful placebo effect?
I'd turn that question right on its head. I sat on a beach once in Greece, reading a paper about the placebo effect, particularly in pain, and the calculation that in some situations placebo can account for 80% of the observed phenomena. And so first of all, my confidence went down the tubes. I said, we're teaching people 4 or 5 years to do something when placebo can do even better.
Yeah.
And then I realized I'd turned it the wrong way around, because placebo is simply the self-healing, correcting phenomenon. And it doesn't take much nudging. And then I realized that's what we were doing. We're nudging self-correction. And I sat on that beach and said, you know what? I want to get better placebos, to find ways of breaking a slight blockage that, a blank placebo, let's say, might not break through. So I very much see the herbs at their most powerful, which is why it can be so quick, as I call it nudging. It just knocks the door a bit and just gets something moving, and then the rest is placebo. And everything we do is placebo if you turn it that way around. So a pharmaceutical that has a receptor effect can overcome placebo in a head-to-head competition. But, as honest doctors will admit, the pharmaceutical doesn't heal. It'll break down a door somewhere, but the healing is what happens afterwards. And that's the business that I think I want to be in. I want to be in how to help the body to find its own innate healing capacity.
Yeah. In the hierarchy of all the different interventions that one has available to them, so you have diet, you have mind therapies, you have exercise, you have a whole suite of different elements, and then you have pharmaceutical supplements, herbs. Where do you see it fitting? and like you said, nudging the door open and stuff. Is it purely a nudge, or can it actually have those those genuine therapeutic values?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of evidence to show that plants do cover the gamut, the whole spectrum, from foods on the one hand, which is where we start, and we'll come back to today. We're going to talk with great enthusiasm about how we can add value to our foods simply and cheaply, right through to things like digitalis, which is foxglove, for heaven's sake. And so some of the strongest remedies are plant-based or come from plants. Opium, forget, say no more. So there is a spectrum. And, particularly when we talk about self-care and looking after ourselves, because we always focus on the gentler versions. But as you get increasingly practice proficient, you can use some of the stronger ones to break a stronger door, if you like.